you would take pills during the day, but then you'd have to set your alarm for the middle of the night to take the next dose. So you never felt truly rested.
Welcome to HIV The Morning After. I'm Dan Hall. I'm a documentary producer and director. I've spent my entire adult life watching ignorance and prejudice play out around HIV. And frankly, I'm tired of it. And I'm sure many of you are too. This podcast is an attempt to do something about that. Not through lectures or statistics, but by doing what I do best. Interviewing people and letting them tell their own stories. Real voices, lived experiences, no bullshit. These conversations matter, and if you think so too, please rate, review, and share HIV The Morning After. I can make these episodes, but I can't make people listen to them or find them on their algorithms. That bit's down to you. You can reach me at hivthemorningafter@gmail.com. Right then, let's get started. Today, I'm speaking with Jim Vogiatzis, an HIV survivor who worked in the media until ill health prevented him from continuing. Jim is an activist and fundraiser who describes himself as passionate about human rights and injustice, with a particular love for what he calls daft telly. Diagnosed well over 30 years ago, Jim makes a conscious decision early on in his life that he wanted to be involved in the fight rather than be a bystander. A commitment that has shaped his journey ever since. Jim, welcome to HIV The Morning After.
Hi, Dan.
It's lovely to speak with you.
It's lovely to speak to you.
Now, for full disclosure, Jim and I are actually friends outside of this podcast, and we've known each other for how long?
15 years.
Goodness me, is it that long?
Yes.
How old must we be now?
A lady doesn't discuss her age.
Now, Jim, to start, can you tell us, please, about your diagnosis story?
I was in a very on-off relationship with somebody, and I noticed that over a period of time that they were looking what I'd say was a bit frail, and they were having lots of unexplained illnesses, which coincided with me having lots of unexplained illnesses as well. So I did make a conscious decision, even though I asked them repeatedly if they were positive, they, for whatever reason of their own, could not bring themselves to tell me.
And Jim, just to step in there, what year is this?
1988.
Okay.
I decided to make the decision to go to the GUM clinic at James Pringle House and get tested. And back then, you were only identified by a number to protect your identity and anonymity, even though there were plenty of people in the waiting area who I knew. So you would be sitting there giving each other knowing looks, but unable to really say anything to one another.
And so you have the test taken, and then you have to wait 2 weeks. What is that 2-week wait like?
It was agonizing, but you go in through every scenario in your head about what you do if you're told you're positive, how you're going to react, how you're going to react if you're told you're negative. You weren't able to speak to anybody about it because you didn't know how anybody was going to react. And there was a lot of really negative press put out in the right-wing media.
What kind of things were you seeing in the right-wing press?
Oh, things like, that we should be deported to somewhere like the Isle of Wight or some other island. Or there was an article about a priest who said if he found out his son was HIV, he would have him shot. It was really disturbing, the kind of things that you were hearing about.
So while you're waiting for this result, your normal life is having to continue. What is that normal life?
I was working for London Weekend Television at the time. So I would be going into work, continuing to do what I did every day, trying to keep up a smiling, friendly face to everybody. But you're working really closely with a team. They know your moods in and out. So people would pick up on when something was wrong. So trying to keep that mask on for that couple of weeks was awful.
And what about friends? We're often told about the strength of the queer community, and we're looking here, at the late 1980s. Did you get any support from the community?
I chose not to speak to anybody. The minute you tell somebody that you're going for a test, then you're almost inviting them onto the journey that you're going on. So I didn't want to burden anybody with that until I actually had something specific to tell them.
I'm going to take you now to the morning you get your result. What are you thinking? What are you feeling?
The tube journey was nerve-wracking. And you kind of reach the clinic waiting for them to calling your number out. And you go in and they would ask you if you would like to speak to a counsellor. So you kind of knew what was coming when you spoke to the doctor. And the first words they would say to you was, "I'm really sorry to tell you, but you're HIV positive." I just wanted to leave the clinic as quickly as I possibly could, just as I needed to be outside and have some fresh air and gather my thoughts about what I was going to do next. And what I did next, I actually went straight back to work because I thought, I can sit here stewing on this, or I can go to work for a couple of hours, apply my mind to something else, and think about it later.
What are you thinking is going to happen to you?
You kind of thought it was a death sentence because the majority of people who were diagnosed around that time or earlier, within 2 years, they were either developing serious illnesses or they were actually dead.
What had been your experience of HIV/AIDS up to this point? What had you witnessed amongst the community, amongst your friends?
I've seen various friends who were HIV slowly become ill and frail. I'd actually been there when they died, which I saw as an incredible privilege to be allowed to be there with them and hold their hand or stroke their hair and tell them that they were loved. Because for a lot of people, when they told other people they were HIV positive, their family and friends abandoned them, or a significant number did. So the handful of people who were still around became their family, became their support, became their carers.
Can you give us an idea of what it is like to be in this situation? What it is like to be with somebody when they are dying? Where are you? What is the place like? What is the mood like? Take us to that place so that we can understand what you witnessed.
Some people chose to die at home, and most hospitals and doctors would try and facilitate that as much as they could. For the people who died at home, I think for them, they died a much peaceful death because they were with people they could be with. They were surrounded by things they wanted to see and hear familiar sounds. Sometimes people would ask for music. Sometimes people would ask to be talked to because they just wanted to hear that familiar voice. There was somebody who developed like an AIDS-related dementia, where by that point they didn't have a clue who people were, or they would recognise them for a millisecond and then want in the next moment be questioning who they were and what they were doing. It was really distressing for them to see them going through this, but also really distressing for their loved ones who they just didn't recognize anymore. It was just incredibly sad to see that. You just wouldn't wish that on anyone.
And Jim, why were you helping when others walked away?
I just had to. There's just no way I could walk away from anybody. Never have, never could, never would. It's just not in my nature.
We're at the end of the day at LWT on the day that you have got your diagnosis. You have all of these memories of all of these people that you have supported and been there for. You've seen the coal face, the raw front end of what HIV/AIDS does to people. And now you've been told this is going to happen to you.
So you kind of question everything. You know, what's going to happen to me? How am I going to die? Am I going to develop this illness? Am I going to develop that illness?
And what did you think your death would be like?
I was told by somebody I would die alone, basically because of my diagnosis. And that kind of thing sticks in your head. And no matter how much you don't want to believe that, it comes back to haunt you.
And how does that make you feel?
Desperate. Absolutely desperate. Because nobody wants to die alone. Nobody wants to feel that nobody loves them or cares for them.
And so do you decide to keep your diagnosis secret?
For a time, I did. And then the first person I told, strangely, was my boss. And my boss at LWT was a very no-nonsense, very stern chap who a lot of people found unapproachable. And one day, he called me into his office and said, I noticed something wrong.
What do you think you noticed was wrong?
I just think he noticed that my mood had shifted. And whilst I was still being on the surface, all smiles and being jolly, he clearly picked up on something, like some people do. Of course, it goes through your head, is he going to reject me? Because that's what most HIV people fear the most, is rejection. Whether it's from family, from friends, or your work colleagues, that's what you fear the most, rejection. I just blurted it out. And this is a straight man who, as I say, was quite tough. He just came round this desk, put his arm on my shoulder, and said to me, don't worry, everything's going to be okay. Whatever we can do, whatever you need, we'll give it to you. And he did. He stuck by his word.
So can you tell us what year we're in now and what is the next significant milestone?
After telling him, and then obviously having that gap in between telling him and then me starting to redevelop signs that I needed treatment. Yeah, it would have been about 1990.
And I have to just say, jumping in here, because as listeners to earlier episodes will know, I do love my pop culture references. Jim is a big fan of Doctor Who, and your favourite TV show had just been decommissioned.
Indeed, I had.
So all in all, it was a shit few months.
Yes, it was.
So it's 1990.
Yeah.
And what symptoms are you starting to have that mean problems?
I was starting to really have problems with chest infections I could never shake off. I was getting pins and needles in my hands and my feet, and that turned out to be neuropathy. Basically, neuropathy is the inflammation of the nerve endings in your hands and your feet, so it feels like you've got constant pins and needles, which is incredibly painful.
So how did you feel starting to become symptomatic?
Scared, not knowing what was going to come around the corner, but you thought, well, if I could get a chest infection, then that, you could quite easily get pneumonia or worse, PCP, which most people didn't survive. Yeah, there were a lot of things being talked about in clinic about possible treatments coming down the line, but they were still being developed, and they were still what I would call fighting in the dark.
I think saying fight in the dark is a fantastic way of putting it, because I remember witnessing when my dad was going for chemotherapy for his lung cancer, being in rooms with other people, and there being this hope that something would work, and you'd come each week and somebody would say, oh, I've been told by my friend that there's this honey from Portugal that's really good, or there's this, or there's that, and they were all just these sense of just grasps in the dark.
Oh, it was the same in the HIV community. You were told that if you took, large doses of vitamins, or again, some kind of strange honey that you could find at this particular shop that nobody ever heard of. So people would try anything and everything. I started to feel really run down, like I had no energy at all. And if anybody knew me before that, I was, a right disco bunny. I was always going out. I was always in the bar, life and soul of the party. But I'd noticed over that period that I'd started to deteriorate.
What treatment options did you have at this time in 1990?
There wasn't much they could offer. All they could do was treat the symptoms that you had, whether it was chest infections, skin rashes, etc.
And whatever treatments are available, generally still people aren't surviving.
No.
Whatever you're doing, you're staying alive. And then some point in the early 90s, you join the AZT Concord trial. Tell me about that.
The drug itself was absolutely vile. And the routine that you had to take it in was horrendous, because you would take pills during the day, but then you'd have to set your alarm for the middle of the night to take the next dose. So you never felt truly rested, because you were constantly on this cycle of taking pills during the day, pills in the night, and then during the night. And the side effects of AZT were severe, ranging from nausea to the point where you vomited quite a lot. And again, they would give you medicine to try and combat that, but sometimes the nausea was so horrendous that you couldn't help yourself but be sick. Diarrhea, it was affecting my social life, because I was scared to go out, and then find myself spending most of the evening in the toilet, either being sick or having diarrhea. The quality of my life was really becoming affected, and that was affecting how I was feeling mentally. So I took the decision that I would come off AZT and take my chances until something else came along.
Now, that was quite a brave decision to take, because I remember AZT being hailed as a miracle drug, and my understanding is that the journey that a lot of HIV positive on AZT went through was taking the medication until death. So you made am I right in thinking you made quite an unusual step in coming off of it? Because it was a drug, I remember, that people were clamoring to take.
My doctor was furious. He did everything he could to, try and persuade me not to stop.
Can you tell me about Stuart?
Oh, Stuart. Such a lovely guy. Very outspoken. He knew where he stood with him, and I liked that. And I found that really attractive.
When did you meet?
In the Bell, in King's Cross. It was a great pub, but it was mixed. So you had all walks of life going in there, whether it was, gay, lesbian, straight. There were some transgender people back then going in there. Before I'd even told him, he guessed.
And how did that conversation go?
It wasn't really much of a conversation. It was just him just telling me, don't worry, it's not an issue. Because I am too.
What did he look like as well? Help us picture him.
Oh, he was a very sexy skinhead. Wore the boots, the braces, white t-shirt, cheeky smile, Geordie accent, sexy.
My God, Jim, that is so many of your boxes ticked from what I know of you.
He was incredibly sexy.
And so you started dating?
It was more casual than that. It was like, I'll phone you, we'll sort something. And because I was so transfixed by him, I just went with the flow.
Tell me about Jim's life. What year are we in? What is Jim's life like?
What year are we in now? It'll be 92, 93. Living in London's very transient, so I moved around quite a lot. I was in house shares, and that made it difficult because you then had to weigh up, do I tell people, not tell people? For people who were taking medication, that was really difficult because that would mean then they would have to hide their medication from their flatmates so they didn't find out that they were HIV. When it came to sex, it was trying to navigate what your status was and wondering how they were going to react. Some people would react well, others would tear you out as quickly as you got into their bed.
And what was that like? Because sex and intimacy are such a vital part of our mental health, connectivity.
Sure. And the rejection was awful because there was still that fear that no matter how much safe sex they practice, there was still some way they were getting, if you told them that they were going to be exposed to it in some way. Stuart, who I'd been dating on and off for a while, he wasn't the most demonstrative of people. He could be romantic at times, but you were the one who did most of the legwork. But there was one Valentine's Day where I got a postcard of a very sexy man showing his bum. And on the other side of the postcard, it just said, sexy bum, kiss. And I knew it was from him, but that's what he used to call me, sexy bum. We met up that evening, had a few drinks, went back, had lots of sex, because he was very much a sexual type of guy.
Lots of good quality sex, I hope.
Oh, yes.
Of course.
Oh, God, yeah. Dirty Geordie, he knew what he wanted and went for it. And I liked that. In that instance, I knew he loved me. Yeah. The day was just perfect.
we're faced with a situation here where you have tested positive and you're symptomatic. You've been through the bruises of AZT and your pre-combination therapy, so it's pre-1996. And Jim, you're not dead.
Amazingly not. Yeah, I'd had a few skirmishes in terms of I'd had pneumonia myself, and yet I bounced back. So it wasn't my time. Stuart lived in a flat in Hackney, and he was starting to deteriorate rapidly because he'd had PCP and been in hospital.
Can you please tell us what some of the symptoms of PCP are? What were you seeing?
Very breathless, struggling to breathe, night sweat. So he was being treated and monitored at home by having people health visitors pop in, me popping in, various former friends popping in to look after him. And he kind of rallied and got over the PCP, starting to rally. And then he had what one would call a mini stroke. He lost use of his arm, his leg, and the feeling in his face. And that kind of destroyed him because he was such an active person. I think people sense when they know their time's coming. And he made that decision that he wanted to be at home. And that's what we did for him. We made sure that he was comfortable as we could make him at home. And then after about 10 days, possibly 2 weeks, we were talking. He had another stroke. I looked at him, he looked at me, and he passed away in my arms. And that was Stuart.
And at some point, you're offered combination therapy.
Yes, combination therapy arrived, and yeah, we all hailed it as the treatments that would either halt in time eradicate HIV. Yeah, it was a real kind of game changer. And yes, it took a few. Some medications worked with some people, and obviously didn't. So there was always that kind of switching of the drugs to find the right combination for you.
So we're going to wind forward all the way to now, to 2025. And you've had this incredibly emotional, physically, mentally exhausting journey. And you've survived to this year. First of all, can I ask you, what legacy do you feel you physically have from some of those early experimental treatments?
Even with the advent of combination therapy and the fact that it has, halted HIV in its tracks, where it's given some people an undetectable viral load, which means they can't pass the virus on to anybody else. Some of the side effects, will last you for your whole life. So, for example, for myself, I've been left with peripheral neuropathy, which I will live with for the rest of my life. One of the newer drugs, has caused the reduction of my bone density, which means I now have osteoporosis and osteoarthritis. So if I fall over, chances are I will break my arm or my leg or wherever much easier than a healthier person. This is a big thing I'm going to reveal. But with having the neuropathy, it's caused me to become incontinent, which is a major thing in your life where obviously it affects you as the person, but also it stopped me from having intimate relations with anybody else.
And what support are you getting from the National Health Service?
I mean, I get support in that I see my consultant regularly. I have a good relationship with my GP, who is well read, and that kind of reduces the long explanations that you normally have to have with GPs. Yes, things still happen. Like, for example, I had pneumonia about a year or so ago, and it wasn't picked up quickly enough. So what should have been a minor infection became a major infection, and I was hospitalized. And again, this is basically human error, where it just wasn't picked up quickly enough.
How do you feel support services have altered over the years?
That's one thing I'm really sad about, is back in the day, with services coming out of your ears, there would be, you had the Lighthouse, you had the Landmark in South London, which I went to quite a lot because I was living in South London. Then there was the Globe in the East End. But because HIV has become a manageable condition, the NHS has stopped funding those services, which I think is a crying shame, because I think, particularly for old people who were diagnosed a long time ago, that was their safe space to go to, where they could be with their peers and be able to talk to other people. And it's almost like, as I say, HIV's become a forgotten illness. It's like, well, they've got all these drugs now. They're doing what they say on the tin. We don't need to worry about that anymore.
And Jim, what would you say to people who go, why do you need safe spaces? Why are you so weak? Don't be so pathetic. No one's got a safe space. Why do you need a safe space, Jim?
Well, there's some things which, people just won't get. And you want a safe space where you can go and talk freely about things which affect other people that also affect you. And it's that kind of emotional peer support that you get that matters.
You eventually left working in media due to ill health, and yet your cantankerous perseverance and your fury at the injustices in the world didn't stop you from being involved in activism. Why was that?
You've got a choice of either staying quiet or speaking up, and I've always chosen to speak up.
And before we go into the final part of the program, can you tell me about Ron and why is he important to you?
Ron is my emotional support. He he hears all my secrets, so I tell him everything, and he's just a willing listener and doesn't answer back.
I was about to say that, just in case people are wondering, Ron is actually a dog. It's not a human being. This idea that Jim has a silenced human being in his flat that he just talks at. Ron is a dog.
Ron is a dog. Yes, Ron is a beautiful dog who I adopted from Battersea. And Ron was crying in his pen and just put his paw out and touched my arm. And I immediately knew that I had to take him home. And that was the beginning of our journey together. He gives me a focus. I don't just think about myself. I've got somebody else to think about. And where I am, I'm quite isolated. So, yeah, he just helps me enormously with that.
So then, Jim, as we enter the final part of the episode now, I want to take us to the Remembrance Garden in our minds at the London Lighthouse, where the ashes of many, many people have been scattered. So if I take you there, and imagine we're making an audio version of the quilt, who would you like to remember?
Well, it would have to be Stuart. And the only way I can describe him would be a warrior, an activist, and my lover. He was afraid to be loved, but he also wanted to be loved. Stuart left an indelible mark on my heart.
So what would your postcard to the world be, Jim?
We're living in a world where there's so much misinformation, horrible dialogue about the trans community. I feel they are getting treated just as the gay community were treated back in the 80s. So my message will be authentic, love, and never be afraid to say that I love you, and always speak your truth against homophobia, transphobia, and racism.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of HIV The Morning After. Jim Vogiatzis, genuinely a big thank you for coming on. It's been great to talk to you.
My pleasure, Dan.
If you were moved or informed by what you heard today, please help spread the word. Subscribe to HIV The Morning After and leave a rating and a review. It makes a huge difference in helping others to find it. Your support helps to amplify these experiences. If you'd like to get in touch, suggest a guest, or share your own thoughts, you can email me at hivthemorningafter@gmail.com. And remember, if you encounter HIV stigma in a bar, call it out. If you encounter it at work, call it out. If you encounter it online, call it out. Because if you don't, you're part of the problem. The theme tune is by Paulie Nidu at unstoppablemonsters.com. And many thanks to Murray Lang for his continued support. And thank you for listening. Join me next time for another important conversation on HIV The Morning After. I've been Dan Hall.